everybody. Mike Jeffers, Chicago Jazz Magazine, ChicagoJazz.com. Welcome to the December 2019 feature interview for Chicago Jazz Magazine. I am happy to sit down here with drummer Joel Spencer, drummer and educator Joel Spencer. He is obviously many of you here in Chicago and throughout the country know Joel as one of the top jazz drummers in the country, but also he's also an incredible teacher. I actually studied with him when I came back from college for a little while, and he's also at U of I as a professor of jazz studies down at U of I. We're going to get into all of that, but Joel, thanks for coming in. December 2019 and the feature interview. We finally have you back on the cover. You were back on the cover when we were in print. Geez, yes. I don't know, 15 years ago maybe. So
2004.
Is that
May
what
of
it was?
2004.
Is that what it was? Yeah.
That's right.
So we got a lot to catch up on.
Yeah.
We got a lot of stuff happening. So before we get into everything, why don't we talk a little bit about U of I? Because that's where you're at right now, and I'd love to lead off with that, and then we can get back into some of your background, because, I mean, he's got a fascinating background. He started playing gigs, not drums, gigs at 15, 14, 15.
Thereabouts, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the U of I jazz program specifically and what your position is down there, because you've been there for a while, I think.
This is my 8th year, and I'm an assistant professor of music, is actually my title, in the jazz performance program. And it's a very meaningful place for me to be because I went to college at U of I. And certainly was inspired, and I think it had so much to do with my success professionally. So it's really great to return, and there's a sense of giving back. But it's been really strong. It's been a really great place for me to be. And one thing is, it's the faculty that's there. The faculty that's in place is truly made up of professionals. Before they appeared at U of I teaching, they were all out making a living strictly as an instrumentalist. So Chip Stevens, the pianist, he is there. Joan Hickey, pianist, she is there. We have 2 pianists on the faculty. Chip McNeil, who's the chair of the program, jazz tenor player. Ron Bridgewater, jazz tenor player. Tito Carrillo, jazz trumpet player. Myself on drums, and Larry Gray on bass. So it makes for a very interesting moment to play with these people. It's, as we all know, getting better as a player, as a musician, is hopefully you're in a very stimulating and challenging environment.
Well, and I remember, about 15, 20 years ago when I was looking at, well, maybe even longer than that, geez, I don't remember how long ago I went to college, but U of I didn't have that jazz studies program. I mean, DePaul was kind of starting to pop up in this area. Northwestern was sort of there. That was before you were even at Northwestern.
Correct.
And so that's why I went where I went. But now, so many students and even people that are going back for their masters are finding U of I, which I find interesting. But they really made a concerted effort in the past 15, 20 years
Absolutely.
to really develop that jazz program. And it's like turning out some serious players now.
Well, it's when I must say, when they hired Chip McNeil, Chip came along and jumped into the position and built the curriculum, built the degree programs, undergrad, graduate, doctoral programs.
How important, just talking about the degree programs, because I think it's interesting, and I don't think a lot of people, even maybe there's some students out there that are thinking about going to college, but also parents and former people that went to college for music. How important is like a strong curriculum with a focus and a goal in order to build a program like U of I or like North Texas or like Berkeley or something? I mean, you can't just say, all right, well, it's a jazz improv class. There's got to be a structure for an end goal, right? That's the key to getting somebody from point A to point B.
Absolutely, and that would be, I think, our goal, our mission is to turn out professionals, but that's by creating an environment that can be somewhat compared to a professional environment, and that would be performance is the main goal. Playing your instrument well is the main goal. And so while a number of programs may be referred to as a jazz studies program, we're actually referred to as a jazz performance program. So I think that's what's so helpful. Once again, like I said, Chip McNeil, he's played with Arturo Sandoval. He was on Woody Herman's band, Maynard's band. People, Jim Pugh, and I forgot to mention Jim.
Yeah.
Our illustrious trombone teacher, incredible player, major studio performer in New York, and right now still touring with Steely Dan.
Yeah. Well, and that I think kind of goes back to almost like your beginnings too. But I mean, talking a little bit about the jazz program, there's some jazz programs in the country that have it so that you go through the curriculum. Here's the books. Here's what's happening. Here's your jazz ensemble. Whatever. You talk about performance. which means there's a lot of listening, a lot of tune learning, and a lot of real life experience that when you're in an environment, in a controlled environment, it's completely different than when you go out and play a gig. But having people like yourself that have played thousands of gigs, I mean, how do you relate that back to a student? So like if somebody walks into an improv class and they're going to sit in your combo class or in a big band class or something like that, how do you as a professor / performer / professional musician get that situation happening in that classroom so that they're getting an understanding of kind of the difference between sitting in a classroom and being out on a stage?
Well, there are the techniques involved, whatever subject we're on at the moment and the direction of the class, we're dealing with that. But I think for us as teachers, relating much of the time, and I think it's really great to talk about professional experiences we had where we had to utilize those techniques, where we had to focus in the way we're focusing in the class. The fact we're in a certain direction in the class, we're focusing in on a subject about the music, and I think that professional experience really comes into play. That you could mention when working with so-and-so, when traveling with this leader, with this band, when recording with, so-and-so. This came up, something that relates to that situation. You hope you can really help them. Then, of the immediacy of any one of us picking up an instrument and playing along with the students.
Right.
So that's one of the, I think that's certainly a big part of our program is that, and we play with students often. There are performances such as the Iron Post in Urbana where students could certainly be included, and that's always fun. I think the students also learn one of the most important things that, see, none of us are bigger than the music. We're all perennial students.
Yeah.
We're all learning. Our faculty, I speak for myself, are constantly learning. You learn from teaching, and hopefully, and certainly everyone is responsible for getting better. So that's a constant. That's another thing we teach, that this is a commitment for life, playing music. Being a great musician is a lifelong goal, and it always has been for the greatest players.
Mm-hmm. I think that sometimes it's overwhelming, and I remember when I was studying with you for a couple of years after I came back from school, and I mean, I could play, I could do stuff, but I was studying with you, and the stuff that you and I were talking about was business related in addition to playing related. And I think that's one of the things that people don't realize, that if you go somewhere and you're getting your jazz studies degree, and a lot of the schools have really killing teachers and really killing players that are teaching there and stuff, so they can give that information. It's more than just learning how to play. It's like you have to understand business. You have to understand you're in business. And you and I would have long conversations about, this gig, that gig, what to charge, how to contract, where to go, how to get there, how to unload. I mean, all of that stuff. That's stuff that you cannot read in a book, right? I mean, that's...
Oh, that's right. I mean, we certainly relate all of those experiences that we can from our own to students. We certainly will help students out just as much as recommending someone for a gig is a big start. Perhaps a student's going to go out and play with a particular band. Any information you can lend to a student, great, but certainly with our faculty and with all the variation of talent and abilities and experiences as a faculty, that's what makes the faculty in Illinois especially strong. We're coming from a professional base. Students are interested in becoming what we've certainly been trying our hand at. They are following our footsteps. So, I mean, so we're really proud of that. And, like the progress of anything, students have up days, great days, some days concerned about their playing, maybe not feeling as confident. And we're certainly there to help them and to keep them in the right direction. At the same time, we're consistently learning the same things.
Well, and that's one of those things too, is that I always found it really important to trust whoever's telling me what to do, because sometimes you're, as a student, you're like going, "Are you kidding me? Why am I going to play this whole thing with my left hand? What are you out of your mind? What are you crazy?" But then the person that's telling me that is doing exactly what I want to have happen. Now, when you first started playing, going all the way back, when you first started playing, you had a great teacher yourself, right?
Yes, I did.
And was that the experience you had where this guy's telling you to do stuff and you could see him demonstrating it? And I mean, it kind of relates back to U of I too, but with you, when you first started, guys showing you how to do it, you wanted to do what he was doing and you started doing it, right? Who did you study with?
I studied with a drummer educator by the name of Donald Kneva. Don went to DePaul University in the late 50s, and as a first grader at St. Denis Grade School in Lockport, found out he was our band director. He was also, if I have this correct, if I have the story correct, Ahmad Jamal was a student for a minute at DePaul in the late 50s. Don played drums and did some trio work with Ahmad Jamal. Now, at the same time, he had this experience, an extremely bright, gifted musician and band director. He was very concerned about you doing well, but first and foremost, teaching you what it is to work hard, to stay with something, and when something doesn't come very easy, to succeed at it. To succeed at things that are difficult is a great power. It's an incredible confidence builder. And so he was adamant about that. And people taught differently in those days, but he had a phrase: if you weren't doing so well and you came to a lesson, and I endured a couple of these, where he just would look right through you and say, you need to save my time and your parents' money. Maybe you should rethink this now. I understand that certainly isn't my method or my style of teaching, but at the time, I must say, it actually wasn't mean-spirited. He meant the best from it, and he truly wanted you to maybe inspire you through that little speech about, and for me, and the kind of kid I was that worked well, I thought, I'll come back and have this together and let you know that I'm serious about this. That would end up inspiring me. I'm sure there were some kids that weren't so inspired.
There's somebody watching this right now going, that jerk. I remember that.
So, but he sent, in fact, one of his students that became very inspirational, Don Casey, ex-dean of DePaul University, who studied with Don at some point, and if his name was mentioned, Don Casey would go on and tell you about how great Don was and what he was able to do.
Yeah. Well,
I was very lucky to have that kind of teacher who felt responsible, and he was very serious about it, and he took issue if you didn't work hard.
Yeah.
This was something serious. He was like that about everything, and he led the same kind of life, and as I got older, I realized his life was very much in that mold and that image. He was someone who was a very hard worker who took care of business and nothing for granted.
Yeah. What year, how old were you when you first started playing drums?
I was 9 years old.
Why did you start playing? You just loved it?
I came up in a household, my parents liked jazz. They listened to jazz. And as I would learn from my mom, because I, as a kid, say, Dad has all these records. And she would tell me when he was in the service, he started collecting records and carried records with him and enjoyed the music of Benny Goodman, Billie Holiday, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, and eventually Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker, who at the great naval base,
Great Lakes.
Actually heard Charlie Parker live, Charlie Parker coming through on tour and playing some gigs there. And so it was quite a normality to hear him play. I once said, so what was that like? And my dad just said, he could really play. I'm sure he could. But I came up in a household of listening to this, and whatever came to me, hearing the music, my decision to play drums became for real. And I can honestly say, as a 7 or 8 year old kid, I heard the drums, I fell in love with that. And I thought the greatest thing I could become is a drummer. I never changed my mind.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So you were listening to stuff, then you're taking drum lessons and all that.
I eventually started taking drum lessons, but I heard the music first. And my dad would play records, and I'd hear it a couple times, and he'd say, so I told you who that was. Can you tell me who was just playing? And Oh, that's Lionel, excuse me, I don't know if I could get the whole name out, Hampton playing Vibes. And they said, who's that playing? And I started to learn one of the first images, audio images I heard. I could tell the difference between drummer Davey Tuff and Gene Krupa. Gene had a much stronger hit. You could hear his bass drum was present, aggressive. And then you heard Davey Tuff. He was almost, quote, a bit more sophisticated. His playing was a little lighter. He swung with greater ease. I would learn years later he was certainly a disciple of Papa Joe Jones from the Count Basie Band. And that's why he played that way. And then there was Gene. And I started telling the difference, and I would listen to records, and probably my first relationship, that is musically with jazz, I could tell who was playing by the way they sounded on a particular instrument. That was the first.
And that's what people strive to learn, like 20s, 30s, 40s, 50-year-old people, and you're able to do this like 10.
And somehow I couldn't say it this way, but I realized, oh, so you play, and you can play the way you play, and you can sound different or sound the way you might sound. And so there's this freedom of individuality. And something was talking to me, and through the music, and somehow I felt that. But the fun was I could hear a piano player eventually, or a horn player, or I knew, oh, that's Benny Goodman playing clarinet. And started recognizing people by the way they sounded, by the way they played. And it just kept going. Eventually, of course, oh, that's Max Roach. Oh, that's Roy Haynes, just by the way he tunes his snare drum. Right. Oh, that's Art Blakey in the Jazz Messengers.
Yeah.
Of course, as you know, jazz players love to do what? Everybody likes to have the blindfold test.
Oh, yeah.
And play records and who is that and recognizing it. It's a lot of fun, but guess what? Eventually you realize that we all have our own voice, and you can be recognized in the same way.
Well, that's the goal.
That's the goal.
That's a big goal.
It's to develop your own sense of individuality. And that, by the way, is something I'm extremely proud of in our jazz program. I think that that's really key, and I think that has a lot to do with people feeling motivated and getting better, is that to understand it's quite all right to be you and to sound the way you sound. You know, in this life, one of the most uncomfortable things is to try to be someone who you're not.
Right.
And so there's a certain truth, and I think we all learn this, and there's a certain sense of maturity in learning that. But the goal is you have your own sound, and so you listen to all your favorite players. None of them sound alike. So I think it proves to you that you have a license to your own individuality.
Yeah, you find your own voice.
You find your own voice.
Now, you started playing a gig when you were in high school. And to me, the best way to find your own voice, obviously, is playing a ton of gigs and learning how to do stuff. But you started playing a gig, and it was like 5 nights a week, right?
It was 5 nights a week. I begged my parents
and you're in
to let
high
me
school.
to do this. And I mean, music was everything.
Yeah.
Music for me was all school year and all summer, and going to anything from what was orchestra camp to wind ensemble camps to eventually jazz. So music for me was literally 12 months a year and studying private lessons. There's nothing I enjoyed more.
Yeah.
It was no doubt about it. And by the time I got to high school and got to that age, and the kind of teacher I had then, I was starting to learn, and through him, his name was Jim Salbago, who was an incredibly talented drummer. We should talk about him a little bit. He was someone who started to put me on gigs and started subbing for him.
You started subbing for him?
I started subbing for my teacher because he said, look, I can't make Saturday night. You should play it. And people were saying, so you're having this young drummer, how old is he? Well, 14 or 15, and his parents are going to be driving him to the gig. So they took that back and said, wow, what's going on? But this came up where actually bass player Roger Dewar, brother of incredible saxophone player Ron Dewar, we were starting to do some playing together. Roger lived out in Plainfield, Illinois, very close to me. Roger was probably in his mid-20s, started playing some gigs, and he decided that this group was being put together, by a pianist by the name of Billy Mattei, who just spent a lot of time playing lounges in Las Vegas and moved back to Joliet. And There was a job 5 nights.
There was a lot of, but we should preface the whole thing because back then there were like a lot of lounges happening all in Joliet, all up Mannheim Road, right? Wasn't that happening
there
and all that?
Restaurants, hotel lobbies, everything seemingly had a live band. It was odd if a place didn't have a band. So there was a lot of things going on. But this came up, and Billy Mattei, Roger on bass, Dewar on bass, Billy Mattei on piano, a very interesting guitarist by the name of Jack Townhill was playing guitar, and I got an audition, and Billy heard me play and decided he would hire me. And he also told me, if you sound or act like you're 15, I'll be sure to fire you.
That's like a great line.
When I was at the audition, he looked at me and he says, do your parents know that you're here? And there was nothing more important. And then I found out that he was going to try me, and I have the gig. And so I told my parents, it's 5 nights a week, and it's 3.5 hours a night. And they were just looking at me, kind of staring. And I know they were thinking, oh no. Well, to make this
There's 5 nights a week, but what time did it start and end?
It was 9 to 12:30.
On a school night?
On school nights. And I was basically, my parents said, your grades are going to have to stay in the right place. You're going to have to be able to get up. You can't be tired. And we're going to see how this goes.
Yeah.
Well, I was so motivated and excited about this. I had enough energy for 5 people. So I was getting up on time, going to school, making the gig, getting to bed, getting up on time. And that lasted basically from about July. So for a while, there was no school, through New Year's Eve of that year.
Wow.
That's when the gig ended. It went on for months.
And you're like making some bucks.
Yes. I started making money, and that was my first experience of basically playing a steady gig, playing with an adult band. The level of musicianship was quite high, and it was demanding. And I learned a lot of things about playing with a band and playing in front of an audience and being professional.
I mean, just getting to the gigs, setting up and all that. I mean, people get out of college now and are looking for a gig here or there. Maybe they get one gig here, one gig there, and they're learning how to do that. Time you get to New Year's Eve that year, you were like, whatever, right? It doesn't matter to me. I can go play anywhere now, probably, right?
You start gaining that kind of confidence, playing with people, and you start to realize, and it's the best thing, that you can play the way you play, and people like it. It's okay to understand that you do sound good. It's okay to like the way you play.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's very important that you understand what your shortcomings are and what you have to work on and what your weaknesses are in the same breath.
Yeah, no matter where,
it's all healthy.
No matter where you're playing, what you're doing, even now, there's always stuff to work on, and that's always something to keep in mind.
I still have the same approach that I did when I first started. Set my kid up, I'm about to play a gig, and I honestly feel I have to play as great as I could possibly play right now. This is what's happening. There's nothing else happening. It doesn't matter. It does. It's fun what did happen, but that has nothing to do with that moment in time, and you have to focus and play well. Especially for about the 18 or 20 years I spent doing quite a bit of studio work, I learned that lesson there, that you're only as good as you were today. That's in the present tense.
Yeah.
And that's how you get the next call. And, of course, the next call will follow with how well.
Were you starting to get, I mean, people must have been coming out to hear the band. So were there people like, hey, man, did you want to play this gig or that gig? You were starting to get other gigs, calls and stuff like that?
One thing
you're playing
was,
5 nights a week, but...
Yeah. We did get a small article once in the Chicago Tribune in the art section about a band that someone, I should know who the writer was, I can't remember, about a group that they thought sounded really strong, and you should hear this 15-year-old drummer. So I thought that there was my first bit, and then eventually a guitar player started coming in by the name of Peter Budd, who was somewhat popular. People knew him here in Chicago, and he heard us and decided to hire Roger Dewar and I to start doing some gigs up here, and then we played on the Mary D show.
Oh, really?
And Mary D, who was a newscaster,
She was big back then.
And a personality in show business, had us on. So we actually graduated before I got out of high school. I had a chance to play on TV and to be heard. And things started getting busy. And eventually, near the phone, my parents' house was a ledger, a legal pad, and I could get home from school sometimes, or I was out doing something with the music program at high school, of course, nighttime rehearsals, as we all know. And this person called, this guy called, are you open this date? What about... And so eventually I started getting calls from a lot of different players and sitting in with rehearsal bands in Chicago Heights. And once I got a license and, well, my parents took me, started going to Chicago and hearing the great, iconic players, the greatest jazz players in the world, which was the London House with Oscar Peterson or Sonny Stitt, the saxophonist with Don Patterson playing organ, heard them at the London House, or hearing the Basie Band. Our parents took us out to hear all these great players. Then finally, the Jazz Showcase, Joe Siegel's club.
Yeah, when you started hanging out and started seeing all,
I
all
started
those groups. But
getting way further and further away from home to actually reach some other. And here's some players that I, of course, owned their records. So I was just so enamored, so impressed, just thrilled to be there, and was just constantly learning. I must have been just staring a hole, and my whole view was just...
But this is in high school. So, I mean, the experiences you're having right now in high school, I mean, the amount of stuff you're listening to and the amount of experiences you're having, that's just going to feed back into your playing, obviously, at that point.
Oh, yeah, there was nothing more motivational than to hear, to see Sonny Payne playing with the Basie Band, or Harold Jones eventually with the Basie Band.
Yeah.
Rufus Speedy Jones with the Ellington Band, the first time I heard. It was just incredible. I realized just how great people really were. It was scary. Scary good.
Would you see these guys down at the ballrooms and stuff too? I mean, they'd come into the showcase, but were you like at some of those older ballrooms?
That was the thing. Ballrooms in large places in Joliet, Illinois. I was raised in Lockport, and the Musicians Union.
Yeah.
I became a member of the Musicians Union when I was in high school. Those were the days when unions were strong, and you had to be a member. Union players wouldn't hire you unless you were a member.
Oh, even in the clubs and everything,
you
had to be in the
well,
the union.
they believed in it. It was a deal. My dad was a part-time musician, and played swing and played some jazz and commercial things. And the Joliet Musicians Union was great. When you had the yearly banquet, would be a major big band. It could be Woody Herman's band. It could be Stan Kenton. It could be Duke Ellington. It could be Count Basie. So as a kid, I heard all these bands live, sitting there at one of the front tables, just absolutely mesmerized.
It's unbelievable. So you're doing all this stuff, but then it gets to a point, I mean, you're playing gigs and everything, but then you decided to actually go to college. Because, normal person would have said, hey, man, I'm making plenty of money. Why am I going to go to college? What am I going to learn in college?
Well, I think during my era, a lot of young players like myself that found themselves making some good headway, that was a choice.
Yeah.
And honestly, you would, as I did, I went off to college, and I did take a cut in pay.
Like a big one.
I mean, I did. And some of the experiences in the bands I was starting to play with, so much so I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
But I have to include this because it was a wonderful moment. An agent that was out of Chicago Heights, Lord, if I could remember his name, I got a call from him. Bill Chase was auditioning drummers for the band Chase. Now, if people don't know the name Bill Chase was this incredible lead trumpet player with the Woody Herman Band of the highest degree. Eventually, pop music is developing, and we know from groups like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, the groups that were funk pop, we could say bass groups, with horn sections started to develop, along with singers, still trying to get a hit record. The group Chase, and I actually got an audition with Bill Chase.
Oh,
and I must have been 16 going on 17, and it was at Universal Recording Studio right at the corner of of Rush and Walton.
Walton. Yeah.
Rush and Walton.
Yeah.
And I went and took this audition, and the whole band, there they were, and another drummer played, and Bill Chase looked at me, and the first thing he says, "How old are you?" And I told him, and he said, "Oh, that's great. I hear you can play, and you want to play a tune with the band?" So I did. Mm-hmm. And it was fun. I mean, I thought I played good. I was just a kid. I had never played with a funk rock group with horns of that level.
Yeah, right, yeah.
It's a professional band that was making their way in the pop business and had been on national TV. And so I finished, and Bill said, "Let's talk a little bit." He said, "I like the way you play." He said, "You sound like you've probably been playing more jazz. I came up playing jazz, and I was with Woody's band. He says, "There's a couple of things I have to tell you." He said, "First of all, it was really enjoyable to play with you." And he had all these compliments. And then he said, "You're really too young. I couldn't take somebody like you on the road." And then he says, "I can tell you want to play jazz. You should probably do this rather than this commercial music. You remind me of me when I was your age.
Oh, wow.
You want to play jazz. I can hear it in your playing." He was exactly right.
Yeah.
I had this wonderful experience with him. Then, of course, so sad that band would die in a plane crash. It was awful.
Yeah.
And some months later. But I had a chance to play with Bill, and that's something that came out of my experience playing in Chicago Heights. And once again, it was not only a wonderful experience, but he had some great advice to give me, and it was really motivational and just father-like.
Yeah.
I mean, the music business had that mentorship, that apprenticeship to it. The learning about music and learning about music business was directly from people who are actively in it. So the jazz studies programs, that was something of adopting that inside colleges to eventually take off. And it had a hard time at first because it couldn't be recognized as a legitimate art form.
Right. Everything was run through the classical departments and all
Right.
that stuff back then. I mean, so when you went to U of I, you decided to go to U of I. Mm-hmm. But you were a music ed major, right, when you were at U of I?
Well, I went, the reason I went to U of I was I learned about U of I first in Downbeat Jazz Magazine as it being one of the best college jazz ensemble programs. They weren't referred to as degree programs. There was no such thing. And there were two other schools, University of Indiana with David Baker, and then, of course, North Texas in Denton.
Wow.
And those were the three schools everyone talked about. And then eventually got to go to Illinois Summer Youth Music, ISYM, and my teachers were all these incredible players that were in the U of I Jazz Band who, by people like Clark Terry, for example, played and did clinics with the band and would talk about how great the band was. They'd have jazz festivals with pianist Bill Evans playing. Incredible. Al Cohn, Zoot Sims. And it was being talked about that this might be the greatest jazz program in the United States. And I thought, well, that's where I got to be. I thought I was either looking at Berkeley or North Texas. In Illinois, actually, the musical direction is something that really motivated me to go there.
At that time, too, not that you even knew about it, although I do think that you probably played with some of these guys in high school that ended up going there, too. But that whole nucleus of players that were down at U of I when you were there are a lot of the guys that are up here that everybody would know the names of.
See, that's one of the most enjoyable parts of how we all came up. We wanted to play music. It's the most important thing in our lives. And to this day, we still seriously play music. Mm-hmm. And when we learned of one another and got together, that was Summer Youth Music of 1970, 1971. And, someone like Eric Schneider, who's an incredibly great player, has really created, of course, a great name for himself here in Chicago. We were like sophomores in high school. I met Eric, playing. Yeah. And so there's that lineage. And eventually that group of players would move to Chicago and become the Jazz Members Big Band, which is now the Chicago Jazz Orchestra.
Yeah. I mean, there's such a tie, too, from that era of U of I coming up here. So you were playing a lot down there and you're playing with regular guys. What made you come back to Chicago and not go to New York?
That's a good question because
Because you could have gone either way at that point, you know.
I mean, that's probably the greatest summer of my life. Was July of 1972, and a great bass player by the name of John Burr, who was from New York and was at U of I going to school. We became very close friends. He said, "You have to come out, and I have to introduce New York to you." And he did, and it was like a jazz fantasy. I couldn't believe it. I heard Thad Jones, Mel Lewis at the Vanguard. I heard Charles Mingus later that week at the Vanguard. I heard the Bill Evans Trio. I heard Lee Morgan at Strikers in New York. I heard Philly Joe Jones with Sonny Stitt, the Philly Joe Jones Sonny Stitt Quartet with Reginald Workman on bass and Hilton Ruiz on piano. Heard the Duke Ellington Band at the Rainbow Grill in Duke's last year of his life.
Wow.
I couldn't
Yeah, just walking around New York.
Heard Roy Eldridge at Jimmy Ryan's. I mean, it was all my jazz heroes. I was just old enough to catch these incredible players were still alive and still playing great.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned firsthand where this music came from and the kind of care that was put into it, the kind of artistic ingenuity, and just how talented all these players really were.
Yeah. Well, and it's something, too, at that time. I mean, that's almost like the end of the legendary era, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Those guys were still there in New York, and you're walking around and doing that. So obviously you would get an apartment and stay there, right?
I was going out and visiting so much, and by the time I decided I wasn't quite done with my master's degree, I eventually earned a teaching assistantship at U of I, was on scholarship, was getting paid as a teaching assistant, and just decided, because so many of my friends were starting to move to Chicago, that would be a great place to start. And things really worked to my advantage in Chicago. And yet, I was going to New York eventually throughout the 70s, throughout college, and into the 80s, a couple times a year. I loved New York, and all the players were of the highest level. There's many times if there's something missing from my career, I mean, I really felt like I made the right decisions for myself, but that I didn't move to New York, that I didn't live there. But I spent a lot of time there, and the whole attitude and the commitment to playing music amongst the musicians there was contagious for me.
Yeah.
I was always inspired when I came back from New York. And eventually when I had a chance to work there, just the atmosphere and the environment. Once again, you knew when it was time to play, you needed really to play well because you might not have a job tomorrow because in New York, there's a line of drummers waiting around the corner that can play.
Mm-hmm. So when you came back to Chicago, because everybody was coming back to Chicago, you were playing with John Campbell at U of I. Well, we were playing with Kelly at U of I, right? So
we had some, John was living in Bloomington. He was from Bloomington, Illinois. And eventually he was going to school at ISU in Bloomington and decided he didn't stay in college for long and decided, and a player of his level, his talent, I can understand, he quickly moved to Chicago. Well, we did do some playing. At times, that's for sure, and we got to know one another. And I have to say, whatever happens amongst us musicians, and yourself being a professional, you play with somebody and things really click the first time. And you feel like just what it is you do, what your direction is, just seems to fit hand in glove with what somebody else does. That's the way I felt the first time I played with John.
Yeah.
And then eventually I would move to Chicago. He was here, and I'd been here for a couple of weeks, and he asked me, I'm thinking of, in so many words, to paraphrase, making a change or possibly. And the next thing I knew, I was in John's group. But what was special, John was being focused on in town as this incredible young pianist, which he was.
Yeah.
And it was a thrill. I ended up
playing bass.
Kelly
Solo.
Well, for a while, Steve Rodby I have to get to, it wasn't necessarily, I don't believe Kelly at first. It was Steve Rodby for a while, would eventually go off with Pat Metheny. Then it was Steve Laspina, who was a great bass player that would move to New York. But Kelly was there soon on, and Kelly would be the steady bass player for the whole duration of that group.
Yeah.
But I had been in town for probably 5 or 6 weeks and had moved up here, or maybe it was a little longer. Things were happening, and eventually I'd have my chance to play at the Jazz Showcase, and that would be with the Bunky Green Group. And Bunky, being a great alto player, at one time was with Charles Mingus, who was a native. I think Bunky was born and raised in Milwaukee, but here in Chicago, teaching at Chicago State University.
Okay, yeah.
That was the first, outside of course, John's group. John and I would also become members of Bunky's group and started doing a lot of playing. That's what finally got us, at least for me, in the door at the Jazz Showcase.
Yeah. Well, and you guys were starting to get hired, you and John and Kelly, as a trio with people that would come through town at the Jazz Showcase.
I think, once we started developing as a trio and started getting, on stage at the showcase and started earning some of those gigs, and definitely with Joe proving that you could handle it.
Yeah.
And he heard us with Bunky Green and so on. We started playing with name guys that would come in and became the house rhythm section for a lot of people.
Yeah.
One for a duration of time was Eddie Harris.
That's right.
And he actually picked up some really great gigs with Eddie. But one would be Richie Cole and Eddie Jefferson. Richie Cole, alto saxophonist. Eddie Jefferson, perhaps, if not, certainly one of the greatest jazz singers of all time. And it would not only be a gig at the showcase, but Channel 11 and University of Illinois Chicago would end up taping the group, and to this day it can still be purchased. And the only live DVD video of Eddie Jefferson and that group, the three of us were on, and it's still out there. And that would be May 6th, 1979, and May 6th is my birthday.
Well, look at that.
Yeah.
And then that's actually up on YouTube too.
Right, you can go to YouTube. You
it's
can also
wild.
find it. It's still on DVD. You can still purchase it. But interestingly, not complaining, but all three of us were on this DVD with this incredible singer and artist. And that's the first and last time that I was on a DVD with a major artist that's selling in any kind of international fashion. My success came immediate.
It came immediate and it just went away.
It just went away.
Now, you guys also, talking about singers, you guys also, at that time in Chicago, talk a little bit about that time in Chicago, because Rush Street was popping, there was clubs everywhere, there was music every night, there was like 6 night a weeks. Around that time, at some point, you were playing at Dante's Inferno with Frank Dorone, I think, at one point. Were you guys the house trio with him? Or
yes, we played a lot of different
because that was like
gigs.
a real hot, the whole area
Frank
was smoking,
Dorone,
right?
it's people that go back and know Frank Dorone. Frank was very popular in the late 50s, certainly mid and late 50s, and a number of singers in the business that had huge names, everyone from Frank Sinatra to Tony Bennett and so on and so forth to Nat King Cole knew about Frank, and Frank is a great singer. I had heard about Frank's name, but came up to Chicago and actually started working gigs with Frank on Rush Street, and those would be gigs that were 5 and 6 nights a week. They could go for months.
Yeah.
But I remember the nature of those gigs. You had to be ready or getting some good sleep, I should say. Because on, if I remember right, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the gig was 9 to 2.
9 p.m. to 2 a.m.?
Right. I want to say, what's this 5 hour? Yeah, there we go. 9 to 2. Okay, yeah, right. And then when it got to be Friday, it was 10 to 3. And then Saturday, of course, was 11 to 4. You actually started the gig at 11 p.m.
That was packed.
And it could be packed at 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
Packed. People ordering that incredible Italian food, ordering entrees at 4 in the morning. Rush Street had a life of its its own. It was very exciting. Frank was a great singer. Frank could pack an entire room. But what's not talked about a lot is when we'd have these breaks. Wow, talk about fun. You could walk down the street. Oh, here's the great Rusty Jones playing with this group, with Danny Long or someone. Go down here. Oh, Elvin Jones is at the Jazz Showcase. I'll drop in there and hear the end of their second or third set. Those are the days when the showcase was, they said 9, but that meant it was 9:30.
Right.
You always say 9 if you want people to be there at 9:30.
Right.
But the shows were 9:30, 11:30, and 1:30.
Oh.
So you could, getting off of work, because everything wasn't like Adolph's and Billy's that was that late, but you could on breaks walk down the street and hear some iconic player at the showcase. And Joe was, I must say, understood and to help young musicians. Of course, come on in. Not a seat, people are in here, but you could stand near the back door and hear some incredible set.
Yeah.
And then go back and, of all things, play. Talk about instant inspiration.
Yeah.
There was a whole nightlife going on, and eventually I became somebody that was very busy with gigs on Rush Street. And there was a scene. At one time I knew a lot of people that were there that were really enthusiastic about music, people who really supported it all. It was really the nightlife. Live music was the center of all of the fun. The back room was down the street.
Yeah.
Then there was Figaro's Bar, which was no bigger than this room right here, with a horseshoe bar and a jukebox that had nothing but Blue Note 45s
Really?
that were jazz tunes. It was the best. And they had a 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock license. So you wanted to talk to people in the industry that were actors, writers, comedians from Second City. Everybody hung out there.
Ah.
So you got to know a lot of different people that were all in what, you wanted to be in front of people.
Yeah, they're all
doing
hanging.
your thing.
Everybody's hanging out.
And this was a great way to hang out. And there were people in all kinds of fields.
Yeah.
But it dealt with the arts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you play. We should touch on before we move in another direction for a second. But all of the people you've played with as being in Chicago. I mean, so the people that come through town. I mean, you've gotten to play with all the tons of headliners that were at Jazz Showcase. But that's also opened you up to be able to get auditions with different bands and different things throughout the country, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
I remember you telling me something. You were on the road with Red Rodney. I mean, I don't know if that came from him coming through town.
That did come from him coming through town. Actually, the IAJE conference once right here at the Hyatt.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Played with Red, and that eventually would stir some of that up. But another thing, there's the Jazz Showcase. That is the home of jazz in Chicago. But then there was George's restaurant right in the shadow of the Merchandise Mart. And then there was Rick's Cafe American that was on the first floor in the Holiday Inn on Lakeshore Drive.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's when, we all know Holiday Inns and off of the interstate and what they are. But that's when there was a Holiday Inn that was, 70 floors with a rotating custom restaurant on top. And on the ground floor was Rick's Cafe, where you could hear Oscar Peterson, Stan Getz, Freddie Hubbard.
Yeah.
And it was during this time I became the house drummer at Rick's and at George's.
So who'd you end up playing? Just to name drop, because I'm always fascinated by the guys that were coming through town, and you're just like, oh yeah, it's no big deal.
Well, I ended up working with Barney Kessel a bunch and eventually traveling with Barney. I ended up working with great blues R&B singer Ruth Brown a ton. I ended up working with the great Bobby Scott, who composed Taste of Honey, and He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother for the Hollies. I ended up working with him a lot. Who else? Gosh, now that I have to name people. I worked with Eddie Harris there. I worked with Woody Shaw at George's.
Oh, really?
And I used to work with Dinah Washington at George's.
Wow.
A great singer. And this was drummers in town here and people that come in and they'd see me. Hey, we're playing together again. Okay. I used to work with Sissy Houston. I have a story about his Sissy Houston that I have to tell.
Oh yeah, go
really
charge.
Frightening. So
Frightening.
I would end up getting that kind of work there, but inspiring. People would say, you may have the best drum chair in the States anywhere. You have the best drum gig. And I honestly thought that I did because of who I could play with.
And they
I used to work
rotated
with Billy Eckstein there, the star singer from the 40s, who, by the way, was one of the first artists to incorporate young, new bebop artists, Fats Navarro, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and so on, in his big band, which we don't know a lot about because of the recording band, by the way, of 1942 through 44. However, there was all of that. But what was I saying now?
Well, you were going to tell a Sissy Houston story.
Oh, so got one of my first week with Sissy, and things were going well. And I mean, so, she led a group called the Sweet Inspirations, which for a long time was the female vocal group with Elvis.
Oh, okay.
So they had that gig, and
Yeah.
she was kind of
It's a good gig to
the
have.
leader. Yes, she was the leader of that engagement, and on the road with Elvis, they had that gig, and she started playing at George's, and one night we finished, and was getting good friends with people in the band, and I said, "So how do you think it's going? I really haven't heard anything from Sissy." And the pianist Bet Sussman, who used to sub for Paul Schaefer on the David Letterman
Oh,
show.
really? Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody was starting out. I mean, everybody went to different places, I guess. And she said, well, she basically would prefer somebody playing bongos. She's really not that thrilled about drummers. And I said, really? I said, well, I guess I'm doing okay. She said, if not, you would have been gone last week. I'm thinking, wow. Because she'd come in Pat George's for 2 weeks.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
She'd end up doing 12 nights in 2 weeks.
She'd prefer somebody to play bongos.
I mean, this was some funny stuff, right? And so I said, well, I'm sure you guys have had great drummers. Then I hear this. Well, the last drummer we had, she really became aggravated with, and it didn't work out. And, and she's going on, and I'm thinking, who could this be? And then finally, Gary, Sissy's son, says, well, you should know that's Bernard Purdy. And I just kind of sat still and kind of staring at the wall, and I'm thinking, I am following Bernard Purdy with an R&B group, the level of Sissy Houston.
Right? She likes you better than Bernard Purdy.
I guess I was not nearly as aggravating, but the fact is, Bernard Purdy is one of the greatest drummers ever and still living on earth. And Bernard Purdy is so responsible for building the whole concept of drumming in Motown and with incredible artists. I can't say enough about him, so I was humbled and almost thought, I'm glad they told me this now after the gig's going well and I've been playing some nights, rather than the first night to go, well, you better sound good because you're following Bernard Purdy. Oh, gee, thanks. I'm glad you brought that up. I feel feeling very relaxed right now.
Well, and I mean, we've talked over the years and stuff, and I mean, you've got we could sit and just tell stories about some of this classic stuff. I mean, because, I don't think a lot of people realize that when you're in a band and you're playing, and if you're backing up famous people or you're not, but the musicians are in the crowd, there's always killer things going on that regular audience people don't see what's happening, So those are a lot of experiences. So when you write your book, and I'm not helping you because I did Joe Siegel's book, and I got one book.
Well, since
in
you
my
did
life.
Joe's book, and I've heard you've done a great job, you're helping me with my book?
No, I have one book per lifetime. It's gone. But no, I mean, all these stories, though, I mean, and we can sit and talk about all that stuff, but it also, is interesting to me because you have had opportunities where you actually played, I think, with Ray Charles one time, right? And you played with different big bands.
I auditioned for Ray.
Oh, okay.
I auditioned for Ray in Los Angeles, and it was an incredible experience, and he was awesome.
Yeah.
His talent, it was just overwhelmingly great. At the moment, in a couple of tunes I got to play, I thought, is great and greater than I ever imagined. And it was overwhelmingly so.
Yeah.
So without going into it, I'd rather not say. It was a choice that I made. I decided that wouldn't be the direction I was going. But it was an incredible experience to meet Ray and to actually play some tunes with him. And to realize that, working with him, like everyone, music's bigger than all of us. And he focused in. His focus was so incredible.
Yeah.
You know, at a rehearsal in his studio. It's as though we were playing the most important gig in the world. That's how well he sang.
Well, and I was also thinking, like, I mean, you've played with Winton, you've played with different one-offs here, there, wherever, but I'm always interested, and we can wrap it back around to the education thing too, is that it takes, when did you finally get to a point where when you walk into a room, no matter what gig you're playing, you're going to play hardcore intensity, boom. It's not like, you're phoning it in, okay, I'm playing at Rick's, I'm the house drummer, everything's great, but it's like every single time you play, you need to hit that thing. That's where the higher level players hit, and it's hard to get there. And I think for young musicians especially, they don't realize it until they can finally get there. The intensity has to be there all the time.
Well, I can tell you that the truth is, when it came to Rick's, and when it came to Rick's and George's and the showcase, any gig I played, every tune, every night was that. That's the only way you could keep your job.
Yeah.
That's what I learned. You have to play great all the time. It's that old school where guys would say, you have no idea who could be out there listening to you. You develop some kind of a bad attitude, or you're not that pleased about the gig and you blow it off. Someone who is really someone and very important and could be important to you could be listening and think, this guy's not as nearly as good as I was told he was.
Mm-hmm.
That could very well be. So my attitude was, no matter what gig, if it was jazz showcase, if it was the jazz festival, if it was playing a small club and 10 people were there, I had to play as great as I could possibly play, because it's almost, it gets to that neighborhood of, it's not so easy to live with yourself if you're not playing great.
Yeah.
You know whether you're playing as great as you can play. You can't put anything over on yourself. So that was always extremely important to me, but I thought, if I can't do that, I stand the chance of losing opportunities or maybe not getting called next time. I can't afford to do anything besides play as great as I could possibly play. And, when it comes to being, namely, what we're talking about here is being a freelance musician. I would play with steady bands. I would do tours where you'd have repetitive nights with bands. However, I did a lot of appearances with people for the first time. And basically, you'd have to, and it would always be a first night at George's or Rick's, and it would always be great if someone would come up and say to the band or to the rhythm section and get you aside and say, wow, this group really sounds good. You guys really play like a band and all this. How long have you been playing together? Would come up. And I'd have to say, and we it might sound like we were boasting, but it was the truth to say, well, this is the first night we've played together. And then somebody would say, I can't believe that. How is it that you... Well, there's actually an answer to that. This is a language. You speak a vocabulary. So if you have the skills, and of course you can read well, you can understand musical direction, your ears are open, you're confident about your playing, and especially with jazz, it's different. It's not something that can be rehearsed as such. So there's the first impression. You want to stay with this, you want to be in this, I say you have to get up there that first night and play as great as you can possibly play and make it feel and sound as though you're a member of the band.
And it's difficult, but once you do it a million times, it gets easier because you're with everybody's had the like
mind.
Well,
it does get easier, but I think more, it's also, you become that much more comfortable. It's an expectation that you have for yourself. I expect myself, and I'd like to think everyone else. I know the other players would and expect me to play at a certain level and to get everything across and be listening. So, and of course, these first night openings would not only be in front of a big, fresh audience, but there could be someone like Howard Reich from the Chicago Tribune.
That's right,
And I see Howard with a legal pad and ledger writing, and he's writing really busy, and I'm thinking, I know Howard really well, so I'm thinking, Howard, what are you writing? Okay, let's take a break. Show us what you've written.
See if we're on the right track.
And then you'd be playing the second set, and you'd see him get up and walk out the door. Oh, no. He's going down to the Tribune with the evidence.
Well, so we'll jump back up to today. this day and age and stuff. You're still playing a lot. You just did a hit over at the Green Mill with Dave Liebman, world famous.
Yes.
So you're getting a lot of calls still in Chicago. You're obviously down in Champaign, part-time down there, and then you come back and forth and things like that. So you've got a lot of different gigs and stuff. Is there anything that I mean, you never get tired, apparently. I mean, you continuously are always motivated. You can still practice, I assume?
Sure. Yeah, I sit down to the drums at various moments and things that I want to work on. I'm always working with students. And, when it comes to a lot of technical exercises, I do a lot of playing along with my students. They're constantly, as Barrett Deems told me one time, be sure to keep a pair of sticks in your hands at all times, which I'm sure that he did. And he looked at me, he paused, he says, I mean all day. Sleep with them. Sleep with a pair of sticks.
He did it. Well, I won't tell you the first story when I first met him, but he had a pair of sticks in his hands, and he was.
Oh my!
I didn't know who he was, but he was playing all over the place. I was like, okay, man, whatever. But yeah, no. So you're still constantly teaching, which helps you. Obviously, that's part practicing and stuff.
Well,
too.
I mean, I'm still a student of the instrument.
Yeah.
I'm still learning how to play. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I really do. And been playing some with Dan Trudell, which has been great fun at Grand Resort in Lake Geneva, which used to be the Lake Geneva Playboy Club years ago. That is still up there. Lodges on tons of acreage, 2 golf courses, ski hills. I mean, it's still what it used to be.
And he's there 4 nights a week or something, right?
He's there. I think he's there 4 nights a week, 2 playing solo and 2 with the trio. They have a 7-foot acoustic piano, and it's really a jazz trio gig for real. Wow. And there are people that are applauding after tunes and like listening at times. Sometimes it almost can feel like you're playing a club, like a concert in a club. And Dan sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Sounds great. He's got the whole history of jazz piano playing inside him.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of fun. It's been a trio, and using various different bass players. I've been playing anywhere from 3 or 4 dates per month up there. And I know you just brought up, which I'm looking forward to. In fact, I'll be there tomorrow night.
Oh, the Green Mill?
No, at Grand Resort.
Grand Geneva, I think.
Grand Geneva. And I'll also be doing New Year's there.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
So that's.
But then you also do stuff, and I'm bringing this up so that everybody's watching this. You're also, when you're down in Champaign, which is 4 days a week during the school year, you're down there, and you guys play like faculty trio gigs and things like that at Iron Post, I think.
There's the Iron Post in Urbana. It's been developed as a jazz club, not only for faculty, but definitely and primarily for students. Students are performing there all the time, big bands, combos. It certainly attracts an audience outside of students and just locally. Has been really nice. There's also on the Stage Theater in the Cranard Center for the Performing Arts. We have this incredible performance center that was developed, that was a gift from the Cranard family. And the Cranard Center has 4 incredible theaters, but also groups play there. But in the great lobby, there's what is called Stage 5 with it's either a 7 or 9 foot Steinway piano.
Oh, wow.
And there's performances there. There's wine tasting events that are there. And also Cranard attracts many of the performers, artists that would play right here at Symphony Center.
Yeah.
So you can hear, so to speak, anything from could be the Chicago Symphony, the Russian Ballet, and the Chris Potter Quartet, or Jack DeJohnette, or just most recently Chick Corea.
Oh, really? Chick is there? Yeah.
Yeah, played the Great Hall, the Follinger Hall.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of activity in Champaign that way, and students are touched with professional performances and at student prices, at student tickets.
But they're also able to get
incredible.
They're able to get that experience.
Oh yeah,
in Champaign, which is
can
amazing.
Hear world-class performers right on campus in incredible theaters.
Man. Well, thanks for coming in. I'm glad we finally got to sit down and knock out
We're done.
another
We
feature
just started.
interview. Well, I got to have you back because we didn't talk about the Gold Star. We didn't talk, I mean, we got a whole other, we'll have to have a whole other episode at some point. But,
No, that would be great. Thanks so much for having me.
we got a whole
on.
episode on the Gold Star probably this time.
That's worth 2 hours just there.
No, but thanks for coming in. It's awesome. So the,
My pleasure, my friend.
the December 2019 feature interview here with Joel Spencer. Of course, get all the information, SpencerDrums.com. He's got all his releases up there. Everything's going to be live and happening. The website is about to go live, if not at the 1st of December, in the middle of December. But he's got
That's
one
right,
up there right now.
We have a new website.
The new website, yeah,
Yes,
the
indeed.
whole 9 yards. And of course, get all the information on Joel and the U of I Jazz Studies program just by going to the, do a Google search for U of I, or is
You
there a
go to the U of I
website?
School of Music website, and you'll find out all about us.
Yeah, so I mean, it's great resources down there. Obviously, you heard all about the faculty and everything, so it's an incredible school as well. And of course, if you want to see the entire rest of the issues, Chicago Jazz Magazine, if you want to see and listen to podcasts and video interviews throughout the entire month, I do 2 or 3 a week usually. Those are all up on ChicagoJazz.com and every podcasting platform that you can possibly get a podcast on. So until next month, hopefully you will enjoy everything and get out on the scene. And if he doesn't see you somewhere and I don't see you somewhere, hopefully we will see you somewhere soon out on the scene.